Let me share my screen. I appreciate that kickoff. Let me just share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? That silence is deafening. I'm going to say yes.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Perfect.
It's not at full screen, but we can see it.
I'm going to make a full screen real quick. So I'm going to be very quick and brief on the slides because I think Deborah did a fantastic job on the background, and I don't really need to do that. I'd rather actually do demos or do a demo and tempt fate and just kind of show you in reality what RightsHash looks like, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and things like this. So just, in a brief summary, RightsHash really is an engine. It's a software engine. We very much believe in this idea of building software as if you like gears, where we think of ourselves as the gear makers, and most of you guys in the community, as perhaps the watchmakers. Could you build every single gear that goes into a watch yourself? Yeah, you probably could, but does it make sense? Does it make sense to do so? Because there's a lot of fidelity and specialized skills required to do that kind of high quality gear building, if you like, to extend your metaphor. So that's really what we think about RightsHash. It's an engine for really very, very easily to allow you to represent any digital asset using NFTs. And I know at the beginning, Brady mentioned the Hedera token services, and Deborah, you mentioned it as well. I just want to be clear though, we actually use HCS, Hedera Consensus Service, in the majority of our use cases for RightsHash. And there's a number of reasons for it, but primarily our whole thinking about RightsHash is high utility, high volume, low variability, high compliance. It's not one, it's not like a traditional marketplace type of place. It's much more about the utility. And I'm happy to kind of get into the bits and bytes of HCS versus HTS, with you guys and things like, custom NFTs and all of that at a later time. I don't think that's the right forum for it, but just so you guys know. The net of it though is that the technology basically is serverless, open APIs, as with everything we do, and thankfully Hedera supports is real time, and very much we're kind of believers of can you use a public DLT to, as Deborah said, basically prove accountability. We think that's where it's at. Certainly in the world of healthcare. I won't get on the soapbox and talk about all the things that are wrong in healthcare. There's plenty. Consent is one area, but there's so much. But we've been profligate. There's been so much wastefulness, and I think being accountable, being transparent is a step forward. Okay, doke. Why Hedera? I think most of you guys who know me, you've heard me talk about this. We've shared this slide, I think, before. Really, it's many things that we all kind of know about in this community, but it's the net of it, I think, is the fact that we think Hedera is a practical implementation. There are plenty of organizations and plenty of DLTs that promise a lot, but for one reason or another, it's not quite the right fit, whether it's pricing, whether it's code scalability, though, we can get to layer 2 conversations that we're going to avoid today. It could be really around, honestly, stability of the organization. There's a lot to be said for people like Lehman and Mance, the 100-year vision, the governance council. You look around, look at some of the other DLTs and infrastructure out there. See if you see the same kind of thing. Brady mentioned forking, the whole Ethereum forking, the infighting between Ethereum developers and the factions there, as well as Bitcoin core developers and so on. That's, it becomes a real concern when you're building essentially very kind of what you would expect to be very stable, very conservative type solutions, such as compliance solutions on top of that infrastructure. Are you willing to bet your business and your customers on technologies that can easily be fractionalized? So all these things to say that, we kind of think that Hedera really meets our needs. It's not necessarily, we're not saying it's a silver bullet for everything, but from the way we think about the opportunity, we think it's a really good fit. I'm going to demonstrate how we do privacy preserving, and then adoption really ultimately comes down to exposing functionality using open technologies, open APIs, very, very easy to consume. Exactly the same way as you would consume Google Maps as an example. That's how you would use our technology, super simple. So I kind of like metaphors, and I think it's important to to try and think about like the bigger picture. So the bigger picture, when you have a DLT type solution and you let people know about it, is that, it's what's called the Hawthorne Effect, in my opinion, which is, I always feel like somebody's watching me, right? It's back in the day, early 80s with the song. So the Hawthorne Effect is all about the fact that if you know you're being watched, chances are you're going to behave well. You're going to be a good actor. Again, I'm not the inventor of this idea. However, empirically it's been proven. I kind of believe in that. I think we see the evidence of it. Okie doke. So, I want to kind of talk to you about a specific example, because I can do a number of different things with RightsHash around digital assets. However, I think the area that's really interesting, the one we've spent quite a bit of time and effort on, particularly with one of our clients, a real pioneer in this space called consent custody, is around the idea of consent, which is really about an individual providing consent for things to happen. Essentially agreement, for instance, for your information to be used in inclusion-exclusion criteria for a clinical trial, or your child's, or consent to even use an application, and the ability to change that consent, to monitor what's happening with the consent, to who's used it. I think, again, Deborah did a good job explaining the difference between some of the regulations and how GDPR and CCPA talk about, the CCPA being the California Consumer Protection Act, talk about, kind of consent and this idea that if, hey, in California, if somebody's going to monetize your data, you need to know about it, and it's a little bit hokey that you get the option to opt out versus opt in. But regardless, I think it's one that, whether you buy into nudge theory or not, it's one that I think is important because it allows you as an individual to make a choice. And we think that our technology really is helping enable that and make it easier, make it simpler for developers. And really the net of this picture is that, we use Hedera in real time. We take transactions, and there's an internal database, secure, encrypted, your traditional kind of database structure where you store transactions. However, there is a reference. There's an immutable, public, globally kind of indivisible reference using a Hedera NFT. That reference, an encrypted reference, or really a token ID, right? In simple terms, that's the thing that shows the breadcrumbing, that shows the flow of transactions. I'm going to demonstrate that. And you can see this is an example of who may be involved in this kind of a situation for a consent NFT. So you get, regulators and of course individuals, partners, sponsors are typically pharmaceutical firms, could be clinical research organizations, and so on, consortia, marketplace, so on and so forth. So its utility really is for a number of different stakeholders. Okay, doke. I'm gonna get into demo. Just before I do this, again, Deborah already talked about this at length. I'm just really zooming in on this idea basis for consent. All right, let's do this. Let me go into my other window, close things. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen. We have a public webpage, RightsHash.com, if you guys want to go and peruse around. It's just high-level information about kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it, things like this. I mentioned already that we're working exclusively with Consent Custody Corporation, and CEO Brandon McSheffrey is a good friend and colleague of mine, and incredibly knowledgeable in this area. So if you're interested in the whys and the wheres of like managing consent in this new world, and this idea of how do you essentially act as a fiduciary and custodian for an individual, which is really the genesis behind consent custody, I can certainly connect you to him. But without further ado, let me get into a demo. I'm going to actually use the consent custody sandbox because I think it's much more specific and in context. So we're going to go ahead, and by the way, I am completely live. You can kind of see the demo. So do apologize if anything's slow or whatever. Hopefully, I did a demo last week to a potential client and a collaborator, and for the first time in like 50 demos, my entire network just was collapsing. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen again today. But I'm going to just hop into this. We have this idea of consent, and by the way, this is neither a novel idea nor is it kind of like a mutually inclusive idea. But we have this idea that for consent, the organizations involved, the users involved within the organizations, or associates organization, and then there's places where you store things. You could have some other forms of layers of organization or ways in which you describe it. But I'm going to go in here. I'm going to do this live. So let's call this Hedera, Privacy Corp, right? you'll notice straight away that that's the name of the company. We call that the ID. However, we have this very long, what we call the opaque ID, which ends in 5F, being generated in real time and using a one-time, what we call certification key. So it's a one-time, one-way encryption. Deborah mentioned this idea of pseudonymization. This is really one of the ways in which we do it. We do a lot of very sophisticated encryption, linking of encryption for sequence checking, but also pseudonymization, because we believe that certain information like this actually needs to be in a public ledger, or at least could be. Maybe it doesn't need to be, but it could be. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to submit this request. It's a real-time interaction. You can see it's submitted successfully. I'm going to go into our Explorer view. Our Explorer view is basically, if you like, this is kind of one of our clients calls this automated autonomous logging on steroids. So it kind of shows everything that we're doing in real time. You notice as I was chatting that a transaction just appeared here on the transaction log. This is the transaction ID. Those of you guys familiar with Hedera would know this is a transaction ID that is Hedera centric. So I'm going to go in and just immediately pop into basically what we call our Ledger Explorer as part of our Hashlog technology. But the net of it is we essentially inquire from two different sources, Hedera's own Explorer as well as Dragonglass, our partner Dragonglass. We inquire about this transaction. That's the transaction ID. You see it, right? So you'll see it says success. Both of them, hence the 100% score. Both of them basically reported the same thing, more or less in real time. You can see that's Acoer's payer ID. This is our cryptographic signature. But I think that's interesting here is you can see the account ID, right? It doesn't say Hedera Privacy Corp. It says that long opaque number that I created in a one-time with a one-time kind of certification, right? So just keep an eye on this. Those of you guys who are interested in the real bits and bytes, if you wanted to, you can go to Dragonglass. They're not associated to us. You can see the fees that was incurred. If you're really into the geeky side of it, you can look at the JSON as well. So I'll leave that to your leisure to do that, but I'm not going to do it anymore at this stage. I'm going to go back here and I'm just going to continue this idea. So we just created an organization. I'm going to go and actually create a user for this organization. The latest organization 5F, that's the one that we just created. I'm going to go and create a user, and let's create that right here. And you can see, again, we do a one-way, one-time encryption, rather pseudonymization. But I'm also going to add on-the-fly indexing, which is a really powerful concept because this allows you to add things that can be both surface as metadata, but also index and searchable. And you could do it without having to create a giant database beforehand. So I'm going to say privacy expert, and I'm going to add another data. And let's say it's location. And we're going to say, Washington. All right. So I'm going to say Portland. Okay. So I'm going to submit that. Again, this is happening in real time, right? It's going to go there. I'm going to, at the same time, also go and just create a store, use the same organization as before. There is no store. I'm going to call it demo. I don't have to give it a specific name, but I'm going to, and off we go. So that's also happening in real time. And then just to prove you guys that I'm not making this up, you can see things are happening, right? This is like the transaction, and hopefully shortly there'll be another one that pops up that says, oh, here we go, in real time. But anyway, as you guys are looking at this, I'm going to show you that there's a bunch of things. We show the NFTs that are being created in real time, the tokens, the transactions associated. We really truly believe in this idea of accountability. Deborah mentioned it. It may sound a little bit hokey, but I don't think it's hokey in the context of a conservative regulated industry like healthcare or education or construction. Now, these compliance things are things that matter. We're not talking about putting like GIFs on an NFT. We're talking about potentially associating people's personal health data or genomic data and things like this here. One other thing I want to show you, just real brief, though I'm not going to get into it. Part of the sophistication of what we do is a really quite a advanced state-of-the-art distribution of nodes. You can see we have 7 nodes. We have 4 in the US, we have 1 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, 1 in Frankfurt, and 1 in Hong Kong. That's the names. You can see transactions on it. Obviously, most of you guys know Hedera's That's the 20 active ones around the world as well. But we also not only have the ability to do fault tolerance and load balancing in this way, but also regulatory compliance. So Deborah mentioned the new laws, even PIPOL in China, or the new consumer protection laws in India, or obviously GDPR. We have the ability to do the actual storage in a specific location. And that's a really important thing, because end of the day, to be compliant, it's not just a case of saying we're encrypted and we're following standards. It's at times it's about the physical processing and the physical location of what we do as well. All right, I'm going to hop back here and just show you kind of where we're at. So we created a store. I'm going to go and actually create a consent now. So I'm going to go and select our organization. That was the moniker for Hedera Privacy Corp. Here's Deborah's user. This is the default storage. You'll notice there's nothing there right now. I'm going to move my Zoom thing and go into my Explorer. So we have a few demo files. This is a very typical consent agreement. It's one that most of you guys are probably familiar with, where you go and sign a PDF. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it's manageable, right? You can see, this is for a drug, copeptine, and essentially it's a consent from a parent. In this case, it's me agreeing for my child to participate in this clinical trial. I signed it, and the physician signed it. That's a pretty normal thing, right? So I'm going to drag that in here, and you'll notice that immediately we create a hash of this, because this hash is what we're going to reference on a public DLT. Obviously, the file itself is that, and here's the size and so on. I'm going to submit this. And then I'll also, since I'm here, I'm going to go back and let's just make sure we go to the right organization, because we have a lot of different ones here. And I'm going to actually show you the example of taking multiple files and not just one, because you may have a situation where you can see, again, we do the same thing. I'm going to just take all three of them and submit. You may have a situation where, for instance, you have a PDF, you have a transcript of a conversation with a patient, and you may also have the raw MP3 file, and you want to upload all of them and associate them into one consent document, or perhaps even all consent documents associated to one patient for a particular interaction, like a clinical trial, is in one package, right? We don't dictate, our technology being gear makers, we don't dictate your business process. We just adapt to it. So I'm going to go and kind of show you real quick what's happened here. And let's see if we have some consents. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to choose Deborah, and then we'll see, again, all of this is happening in real time. So these are the consents that we put in here. You can see that's the first one with the one PDF, and then here's the three. There's different states. So you could have, in this case, you have a draft state. You could have it enabled, as we call it enabled. I'm going to show you that, right? And enable basically means it's live, means that, now, this thing has been maybe verified offline. Maybe there's a need for doing some verified credentials or whatever it is that you do. Again, we don't dictate the process. We're just stipulating that there's a state. And in this case, it's enabled. I'm going to enable this one as well. Real quick, I'm going to flip into the Explorer just to show you what's happening. You can again see the transactions that are flowing. I think that was the first enablement. I can just real quickly show you that as we're waiting for this to happen. Just so you guys know, I'm not making this stuff up. You can see this transaction. The function is enable consent, right there. And you can again see the consent store. You can see who the organization is and things like this, right? So I think we've already kind of done that. But let me go back here, and I'm going to refresh this real quick just to see the effect. So you can see now these have been in real time enabled. The thing that's really interesting though is that now we have this new link that was never there before, this token ID, right? This is the NFT that we've generated in real time. I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to revoke one of them because I want to show you what happens when you revoke it. Obviously, a consent can be created. It can be in use. It can be revoked. It could be renewed even. It could be, recustodied. There's all kinds of things it could do. And again, that it goes back to the policy and the business requirements of your client organization. We have the ability to do any which way, as they say, in the song. We can do this, we could do that, but we don't dictate it. Our technology allows you to do what you need to do, right? So I'm going to refresh this real quick. and I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to bore you guys. You'll notice that's revoked, right? If I go into this NFT link, you'll see exactly what's been happening. But to me, this is really the secret sauce of what we're doing, right? The secret sauce is that, we have this NFT, which is the unique, indivisible, global ID, basically, this long number. However, now we're showing all of the associated transactions to this. So this is the idea of accountability, transparency, yet privacy preserving work, because now this NFT could be passed, imagine if you had multiple consumer apps, like your Apple Health Kit app or whatever apps that you're using for all kinds of different purposes, and not necessarily just for clinical health, but it could be for preventative health or wearable information or whatever. This consent ID could traverse all of those, because this is global, this is unique, this is privacy preserving, and yet we can show all of the accountability, right? This last one was the one where we revoked the consent. So that's a pretty powerful idea. You can see within our internal database, we show the specific documents, but obviously if you go into this link, you can see that's all the information, the timestamp and who did what. But if you go into the link, you're not going to see the actual document, right? We're not going to show the content of the consent, right? Because that would not be privacy preserving, right? So again, we have our signature and we show that there's a revoke function and things like this. But what we don't show is what the actual consent was all about, who did it to whom, and any of those other things, because that would be a violation of many of the privacy things that we're obviously very interested in. That's kind of it. I mean, there's a few other things I can show you real quick. You guys obviously are very familiar, I'm sure, with this idea of application consent. I mean, all of us do it for pretty much every app, and almost every time I go to Google, I consent to them, using my data to become more of a product and losing data dignity. But what we kind of don't, again, we don't believe in that. We think, if you're going to revoke consent, you basically, in the case of our application, you're kicked out because, you didn't consent to use it. And if you agree, then what we do is that we basically, and I'm going to go and show you here. You can see now I've consented, there's a new consent, and momentarily here, there will be an NFT generated in real time. That you can see that, right? In real time that happen. That says now this NFT essentially associates my consent for this particular time. And then why do we use NFT? And I think really the germane idea is this idea that it's an evidence of authenticity. That's the way we think of it, right? We're not trying to do royalties on this, right? This is a high utility kind of concept that we want to essentially abstract in, so people can use it and rely on it as something that's functional, but not trying to build a marketplace out of it. However, this idea that this is authentic is really, really important. And you can kind of see the history of the consents I've had, right? You can see that's all of the various consents in this demo app. And then you can see the current one is the one from 1352, which reminds me I'm running out of time. Okay, that's really it. I think that's the stage I'm going to kind of stop. There's a bunch of other things we have done and built, but I think that's probably sufficient for you guys to get a sense for kind of what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and all of that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I guess Brady, it's up to you now.